This is the Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Brian Hite, your sports and performance psychologist. Welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So one of the first questions we get into before we talk about your story, what motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Well, I do a lot of different things. You mentioned the sport performance psychology part. I'm also a stuntman. I'm also a writer, and I do podcasts, and I'm hoping to get a TV show going. There are a lot of different areas that I focus on, and I'm trying to think of an overarching motivation for all of them. I guess just curiosity. Curiosity is a big one. Life is interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff out there, and I enjoy engaging with it and learning new things. And that's one of my favorite things. That's why I have a bookshelf out there with just a ton of books that I've never read because I get the books. I'm so interested in them, and I'm like, yeah, I want to read that. And then, I can't. So I would say what motivates me to do all the different things, just really, it's just a curiosity, a leaning into life and what it has to offer.
Yeah, I think that's why I like to talk to creative people or people who are like entrepreneurs because they have that curiosity. They never lost it. Like it's like that. When you're a kid, you're very curious about things, and late somehow you get to be a teenager, you get the peer pressure, you don't kind of step out of the box, and then when you have people who are kind of really motivated or they have something going on, they tend to have a lot of hats. They tend to have a lot of things they're into. They might be known for one thing, but if you have you peel behind it, they've got a lot of things going on, and that's why I like to talk about the depth of people. But we're going to talk about like one of the main point of this episode is understanding pressure and how to reframe it as a choice rather than a necessity or an inevitability. As I think that's what we wanted to talk about today. But maybe before we get to that, how did you come to get into this space of understanding pressure?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been a journey, and it started. I guess we can go back however far you want. I don't know. I mean, for me personally, it started when I decided to take a drama class in high school. That was something that was complete. I still don't know why I did it. I really don't. It was something that so outside my personality. I'm an introvert in a huge way. I was not the party popular social guy in high school. I never want to be the center of attention at the party. And I was in a room full of people with that in the drama class. They all they wanted to be on stage. They wanted to do the thing. I don't know why I chose that, but I'm glad I did, because that teacher to this day on the password questions, it asks you, who's your favorite teacher or whatever. This guy was my favorite teacher. And it was the best class that I'd taken ever. I hated school, and I really enjoyed going to this class. And that's where it started, because from that class, I ended up getting a job at what was at the time Opryland, which was a theme park. Now it's a big mall in Nashville. That's where I'm from. And I got a job as a stage technician in one of the live shows out there because of connections that my drama teacher had. And then the stage manager that I had the very first summer that I worked at Opryland ended up being the company manager of the Batman stunt show at the Six Flags in New Jersey. And
Wow.
I was going to Rutgers. That's where I went to college after high school. And I'd spent the first 2 years floundering. I mean, I was struggling. I didn't struggling necessarily academically. I didn't care academically. I didn't even want to be there. But I was struggling with just existentially. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't know what my job was supposed to be. The expectation was go to college, get a degree, go get a job. I had no idea what job I wanted to do until I saw that stunt show. And when I went and saw that, all the pieces just fell into place. It was pretty phenomenal. Yeah, I was watching this show. I mean, from the minute it started, huge explosion, motorcycles coming and jumping out of various places, people chasing each other on the motorcycles around the set. It was, I was mesmerized. And for the next 20 minutes, because that's how long the show was, I was completely captivated in what was going on. And when it was over, I couldn't even believe what I just experienced.
And you
And I
wanted to
was able to go,
reach
well,
out to the people?
I wanted to go back to, I was able to go backstage. That's the thing that was really lucky for me because I
Mm,
knew the company manager. And so I was able to ask the performers, how do you get to be a stunt person? Like, how do you get this job? And
mm,
they said, well, you got to know how to do fights, high falls, motorcycles, and then go to the audition and see what happens. Well, I did all that and went to the audition. I got the job and I did it the next summer. And that was the best summer of my life. It was the summer where my priorities completely shifted, where I had clarity finally around what I wanted to do. And and it's the summer that made my senior year the hardest thing that I've ever encountered. I was failing everything. I'm somehow managed to pass the first semester, but the second semester failed everything, or was failing everything. So I dropped it all, and I dropped out of college. I dropped out of college with one semester to go to move to LA and be a stuntman. And that's what I did well, I did it. I mean, I'm still going, but
doing it.
I'd say about 4 or 5 years in, I really realized that I missed learning, and I decided to go back to school to finish my bachelor's degree, which wasn't easy. There wasn't an online option and stuff back then. I had to physically move back to New Jersey for a
Actually
semester of college,
go to class,
but I
yeah.
got it done. And then moved on to a master's degree in sports psychology and a PhD in organizational psychology, but not with the intention of ever working in those fields. It was just something that was interesting to me. I came across sports psychology while I was coaching gymnastics. I had kids who would just be awesome in practice and then tank
Lose it.
miserably at competitions, or the opposite. I would have kids who were just lackadaisical and screw around at practice, and they'd go to the competitions and knock it out. And that was really weird for me. It wasn't weird, but it was just interesting. Again,
Wanted
that
to understand why.
curiosity.
You wanted to
Yeah.
understand why, what was going on, like, what made a person behave the way they do, right?
Yeah, that has always been something, because the second and only other class in high school that I enjoyed was psychology. So it's
Like,
really interesting that these days I have the PhD. I am a faculty member at a university in, for psychology, general psychology, etc. I work in this field as a sport performance psychology consultant, and I've been doing stunts for 30 years, and both came from high school. They both came from the two classes that didn't suck in the 4 years that I was there.
and you reach
But
and you went outside your comfort zone, and you actually went to something you didn't even know why you were there. But then it's like, I think that's what happens. I talk to a lot of creative people who are, musicians, actors, directors, artists, and it tends to be like when you go to that outer edge of your comfort zone, that you're not treading water, you're not drowning, but you want to try something. You never know that actually ends up being the thing that you were looking for. Like if you didn't have a direction, then suddenly you find it. It's kind of like a law of attraction. You get pulled into the things that you resonate with you.
well, it's interesting you bring it up that way, because I think a useful thing to talk about is goal setting, and it's something that it's ubiquitous, and I think it's misunderstood, or at least misused in the world very broadly. It's one of those things where if you go into a new, and especially this time of year, you and I are talking mid-January. This is the time where everybody sets their projections. What are our goals for this year? What are our goals for whatever? Like everybody, personal goals, business goals. Everybody's got the goals, and they have to set the goals. And if they don't set the goals, then they get in trouble if they have a boss who wants them to set goals. But people will look down. What? You didn't set your goals? What are you talking about? But goal setting is one of those things where goals are important. They're helpful. They're useful. They're beneficial when they provide direction. So there's something that I've taken a look at the world. I see a thing that I think I would like to pursue, so I'm going to head in that direction. And that provides, again, some direction. What am I going to do today? I'm going to move toward this thing. And that's good. But where goal setting can become problematic, and I think does for many people, is that they get fixated on the goal. They get
Mm.
myopic, they get tunnel vision, and all that exists is this objective that they've set for themselves, or that somebody else has set for them in some situations. But it's this goal. That's it. That's all that they have. And what happens in those situations is when we are so driven toward this one thing. We say, look, this was the goal. I set the goal. I'm going to go achieve the goal. No matter what, come hell or high water, I'm going to achieve this goal. What can happen is we miss the other parts of life. And that's what you just described. So this idea that today, my goal is what it is. My goals are what they are. Given my priorities, given my knowledge, given the relationships that I currently have, these are the goals that I have. But tomorrow that might be different. I might meet somebody new today. I might learn something new today that will shift, probably not catastrophically or from completely left to right, but will shift my priorities. And when that happens, we have to also reevaluate the goals and be okay saying, I don't want the goal anymore, so I quit. We have to be okay quitting. And that's not something you hear from a lot of people, particularly sports psychology consultants. Like, no, look, quit, go ahead. But that's sometimes something that we need to do. The sunk cost fallacy is something that's very real. The sunk cost fallacy, meaning that once we've put in, I'll just say resources, a certain number of resources, it could be money, it could be time, it could be effort, but we've put in whatever we've put in, and we haven't gotten out of it what we'd hoped to get out of it, we will continue to drop resources in, hoping to get out of it what we want to, even though we kind of realize it's like the best example is a movie. I mean, my wife and I were watching this movie the other night, and it was just, we've made it okay with each other to do this. We started watching about, 15, 20 minutes in, enough to give it a chance, maybe even a half hour. We're just like, I can't, but some people are like, nope, I started the movie. I'm going to finish the movie.
I pay for the ticket. I bought it on my channel. I'm going to watch it all the way through. Yeah. It's like, it's like if you're a musician and you're working on a track and you do 100 takes, by like take 101, you're kind of like it really is, it's not really working. You're like, a lot of times I've talked to like really interesting people, some Grammy awarding people, and they say, the first, third, fourth take is really the song. It's really what your intention was. And then you start like wrecking it. A lot of times, like when you get obsessive, you wreck it, right? And you're not getting any benefit. You're actually destroying what you were doing because you're thinking it's going to get better.
Yeah.
But it's actually not any better than the third or fourth take.
Yeah.
And so,
there's a quote. I forget who it came from or who it's at least attributed to, but good is the enemy of great or something like that, or great is the enemy of good. Maybe that's what it is. It's the idea that when we continue to the perfectionist tendencies, when we continue to try to make perfect or make it great, then we're losing the good. We can actually miss the target completely by continuing to try to improve something rather than just recognize that it's good. And here's the other thing too, is that with goals, when we're so fixated on goals, here's the thing. I mean, a goal by definition is something that we don't have that we want to have. We desire, we crave, maybe if you're going to talk about Buddhist in Buddhist terminology, like we have this desire, there's something that we want. And that's again, from a Buddhist philosophy standpoint, that's suffering. We aren't just happy with what is. We aren't just happy in the moment. There's something we lack that we want to attain. And so when goal setting is what's driving us, when we have a very strong, important goal that we're trying to pursue, a lot of times people will pursue it, I mean, to alleviate that dissatisfaction, that unhappiness. And then here's the crazy thing is that once we achieve the goal, then we're happy, but only for like a minute.
Yeah,
and then we're back to okay, what's next?
What if you want $1 million, like, why do you want the $1 million? Then you hit it, and suddenly you want $2 million. Like, so you just keep on, goalpost keeps on moving. Yeah. You have diminishing returns for the effort that you're putting in, because you're never really, like, if you live in the moment, and I always have this example of a jazz musician versus like a classical musician. Like, so if you're a fusion jazz musician, somebody hits the wrong chord, like Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock. Miles Davis actually adjusted the song to match Herbie and didn't start and stop and didn't think it was the end of the world. It actually felt like it evolves the song and you live in the moment. And Herbie Hancock, he's a Buddhist, and he talks about that all the time, about how that moment allowed him to let go a lot of pressure. There was a lot
Yeah.
of pressure to try to be perfect, and the idea is like you don't necessarily, happy accidents in everything from like science to art to are, I've talked to authors like they didn't intend on something and then it came to them out of like the muse. It just comes out of the ether, and
Hmm.
if you're willing to go with it, there's a level of like trust in yourself that you can take this new direction where other people, like if it violates what the goal or the project plan, they can't do it. Like
Yeah.
even something gets handed to them is like, well, that wasn't in the plan. So then they're locked in, like you said, to the goal.
Yeah. Yes. And I think the way that you were just talking about that was fantastic. And it's the way that I think about if you exchange goal for opportunity. That's how I think about opportunity. I think some people believe that opportunities come very frequently. Other people believe that opportunity is rare. And I personally believe that it comes fairly frequently, but I think that a lot of times we don't recognize it. And so I think when I talk about opportunity, I talk about there being three things that are necessary for us to recognize and take advantage of opportunity. And one is right at the beginning. We have to recognize it. We have to be open in our awareness of what the world is, of what's around us, of possibilities. Just accept the fact that the humility, adopt the humility to understand we don't know everything. We
Yeah,
don't
what
have
you
it
don't
all
know.
figured out. In fact, we may not have the next hour figured out because something might happen in the next minute that completely changes everything. So just being open to the fact that life is unpredictable and it's fascinating and there are so many different things, just open to the possibility that something new is coming in. Because if we remain
Well,
open,
resilience and yeah, adaptability.
yeah, if
Yeah.
we remain
Sorry.
open, then when those opportunities come up, we can recognize it. Oh, this is, I was going this way, but now I see this other thing over here. Maybe I should go that way. So that's the first part, is the awareness. The next part is it's the recognition that of what's necessary. It's like you said, it's that trust of okay, so I'm aware that this opportunity is actually out there, but I need to trust that I can shift to it. So in other words, I have this goal A, I'm going this direction. I see
Mhm.
this thing as a possible opportunity. Am I able to shift my focus? Am I able to let go of what I thought I wanted to do and where I needed to go in order to pursue this other direction? That's the second part. So we have to be willing to let go of where we're going and shift. So that flexibility and adaptability, like what you're talking about. And then the very third thing that gets hard, very much into the trust you just mentioned, and that is taking the first step. Because once we are aware and we recognize an opportunity and we've made up our minds that yes, shifting from left to right to pursue that opportunity is probably a good idea, then we still have to take action. And that's not an easy thing to do sometimes, particularly when the direction that we're talking about going is so uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. It's very unpredictable. We've never been down that road before. We have no no history, or even if we do have a little bit of history, it's a new situation, new time. We don't really know what's going to happen. And so taking that first step toward that opportunity, that's the third part. So we have to be aware, we have to be willing to be flexible and shift our goals, and then we have to actually summon the energy and the motivation and have the courage to take that first step.
Yeah, I think a lot of times what happens is people, have fear and they want safety and they want like a known thing. They can use like sometimes this idea of like newfound sounds versus like found sounds. So newfound sound is something like I'm a sound designer. So I have a synthesizer, I have an oscillator, I create something from scratch. I take a waveform and I create it from scratch. People say, well, I don't know if that's gonna work because nobody has any metrics. There's no data analytics of whether this tone actually is popular, right? So it's safer to take the tones that have been used in top 10 hits or number one hits, or use a Hammond B3 because it was used on this. Use
Mm-hmm.
this Wurlitzer because it was used on that. If you try to make something new, you have no numbers, you have no data analytics, you have no algorithms, no information, and people rather stay safe. where like I go back to like 60s and 70s, the people were very experimental in music. Frank Zappa talks about it all the time in interviews. If you watch them, he's like the industry was willing to say, well, I don't know what it is, but maybe the kids will like it. Now we got
Yeah.
people all these data analytics. They think they know what people want, and they give it to them, and then they don't allow expansion. It
Yeah.
becomes very boring.
Yeah, it's interesting. There, that reminds me of another quote or saying or something of there's a like in the French Revolution or something like that. It has something to do with France and some leader, and the leader sees all the peasants and the people, and they're all running in one direction, and the guy says, "I need to go see where they're going so I can lead them." And that's what it kind of that's what reminds me of what you're saying. Like, I need to look at the data to see where everybody's going so I can get in front of them and lead them, rather than just deciding, okay, no, this is the direction we're going. I'm going to get everybody around me and we're going to move this direction together. I'm going to initiate the
Yeah, it's
process
harder to throw it at the
growth.
wall. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to throw something at the wall that's never been known. It's like when you break the canon, you get like a Jimi Hendrix or a Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
You're, Jack Kerouac. You do something on the outer edge. You like Orson Welles. People ask them like, "Well, how did you do Citizen Kane?" I didn't know what you couldn't do. There are interviews where he's asked, like, "Why did you use these camera angles? Why did you do this? Why did I didn't know you couldn't do that." Right. So he was pushing the envelope because he wasn't like being told to stay in a box. And he didn't want to stay in a box. It's his tendency. But people who are on neurodivergent, they tend to not realize that they have to stay in a box. They go outside the box.
Yeah.
and,
Well, it's one of the reasons
they get penalized for that.
yeah, it's one of the reasons that we can get very, very useful feedback about a lot of different things from people who aren't experts in those things. For example, if I'm teaching a class, then I would love to get feedback from an expert in education. That's something that would be beneficial to me. But sometimes, it's the feedback around, well, you know what, I think you could try this, or I think you could do that, coming from people who don't know. They don't know what all the structure of education is, or how you're supposed to organize classes, or how they don't know what all that stuff is. They just know that, look, when you were talking in this situation, I was paying attention. And when you were talking in this other situation, you lost me. And here's what it, and you get great feedback from people who they don't know why all that stuff is, but they can express what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're saying, and in ways that sometimes open our eyes to new stuff. So it's I'm trying to think. There was I don't remember, it was an audiobook or something, and I believe NASA still does this, but every now and then NASA will run into a problem that they don't know what to do with. And they've put it out onto some of these, whatever, I don't even know what platforms they put it out on, but just regular people, a carpenter, it's reading the thing and just, oh, that's a cool problem. Let's see if we can figure that out. And they'll submit it and they get paid. If NASA ends up using their stuff, and there have been, I wish I could remember which book I read about this in, but there have been a couple of decent sized problems where NASA's like, I don't know, you got all the rocket scientists with all their stuff, because what can happen with the expertise is you get so locked into, like you said, that box, that one way of doing it. This is the right way. This is how we do it. This is what works. And you know what? You might be right. I mean, you're certainly right that that's how we do it. And you might even be right that it works, but it may not be the only thing that works. There may be other things that work, and there might be other things that work better.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is like, you get into actuaries and accountants and marketing. They get locked into their budgets. They get locked into the goals, like you said. And what happens is, like, if you have an organization, sometimes you get that tunnel vision, because everybody in the room. Well, I went to Carnegie Mellon. I got a Ph.D. in engineering. If somebody on the floor that puts the pieces together tells them something, right? It's not. I don't think this works. But they didn't go to Carnegie Mellon. They don't have the credentials, but they were working on this every day, and they see it, and they said, it's not working. It doesn't fit right, or it has problems. I see the problems in some organizations. In Japan, I lived in Japan. They'll take that feedback, and it doesn't matter if the engineer came up with the design. they'll allow that feedback to get to the engineer, and they'll look at it and they'll change it.
Mhm.
Other organizations, very top down, is like they can't take it from the floor because they don't have the credentials.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of what you were just talking about with fear too. And this is something that when it comes to performance, many people do like that safe place. They like to only take part in things that they're very, very confident that they can do well. They see not doing well, or what they would certainly call failure, as something to completely be avoided, as something bad, as a reflection on themselves that lets everybody know that they aren't good enough. And this comes from literature, just if anybody wants to read about it. Fixed growth mindset. Carol Dweck is the guru of that. But when we have this mindset of how we are is how we are, we're wired the way we're wired. The things we're good at, we're good at. The things we're not. Our personality traits are just ingrained within us. There's nothing we can do about it. This is who we are. So we need to become very aware of who we are. We need to understand what our left and right limits are with regard to whatever we're talking about, and then operate as best we can within those left and right limits. That's the philosophy of a fixed mindset person. The problem with that is a couple things. One is we're not fixed. And the research on neuroplasticity has made that abundantly clear over the last 40, 50 years. Our brains are constantly rewiring themselves, constantly. Right now, listening to this, your brain is rewiring itself in a way that will change how you perceive things in the future, that will change how you experience the world in the future. And with regard to skill development, etc., the connections that are, well, not even that, but and I'll talk about that in a second, but the connections that our brains make most often among the neurons, those are the connections that get strengthened. That's where learning comes from.
Hmm.
So any skill that we've developed, the brain has adapted it. The brain has rewired itself to allow us to do that. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people don't know, and that's usually referred to as muscle memory. That's what people
Yeah.
think. It's not about muscles, it's about that brain rewiring itself. But here's the cool thing. At least I think it is, because I get all nerded out on psychology stuff. But it's that those same connections are being made when we're thinking, and when
Mm.
we're perceiving, and when we're feeling. All of that is just connections among neurons in the brain. And so we can get into a thinking habit, a perceiving habit, an emotional reaction habit, because we've trained our brains to see things and to react to things in the ways that we have. So those can be changed too. So just like we can learn and practice and become proficient at any kind of physical skill, we can also learn and practice and become proficient at thinking skills, at mind skills. And the way that happens is the same way. It's neuroplasticity. So this is a growth mindset, this idea
Yeah.
that we're not wired, we're not stuck, we are not locked into this one way of being, that with practice, with effort, and attention put in the right place with the right resources, we absolutely can move the needle in all things. Now, we may not move from, uh, nobody's ever going to hire me to be a quarterback in the NFL. There's no amount of practice and effort that I could put in that would put me on an NFL playing field. But if I were to decide, you know what, I want to get better at being a quarterback, there are certainly ways that I could do that. There are drills that I
Mhm.
can do, exercises I can do, coaches I can get, and I could improve. Now, I'm again, there's a limit to that, but I can improve, I can grow, and that's with every single thing. And when we take that idea, and this is where it becomes relevant to what you're talking about, and this fear that you've mentioned a couple times, is when we have a growth mindset and we recognize, okay, so when I try something new, I can learn it, and with effort and practice, I can do it. I recognize, well, right now I can't do it. So when I try to do it, of course it's going to be bad. What else could it be? And so that's okay, because I take feedback from that. I listen to other people, I take my internal feedback, and I make adjustments, and I continue to move forward. A fixed mindset person, though, when they try something new, if they can't do it, then that's just feedback that it's not supposed to be done, at least by them,
Mhm.
because they're not capable of doing it. right off the bat. Fixed mindset people judge success about how quickly they can do something, and like how quickly they were able to get it, and how little effort it took. That's how they judge things. So if you hear about somebody saying, "Oh man, it only took me one try to get this," or yeah, I was like, I don't know, I was even tired today, I didn't, whatever, but I was still able to. This is a fixed mindset kind of an attitude. Whereas a growth mindset person will brag about how much time it took, how much time they spent, how much effort they expended getting themselves better at something.
Mhm.
These are the people like, yeah, it took me 4 years and I was working over 60 hours a week, but I finally got there. Those are those people. So, and it makes a big difference, because the fixed mindset, when we're that's where the fear comes in, because we don't want to try something new, because if we fail, if we don't achieve it, that's a reflection on us as we are wired, our person. It's a very personal thing that we equate this failure with personal inadequacies. Whereas a growth mindset person doesn't do that at all. The thing is just the thing. It has nothing to do with who they are as people. Now, what does have something to do with who they are as people, and this will bring us back to the goal setting discussion, is how they approach these different things.
Mhm.
Is the level of consistency, the level of motivation, the style of thinking, optimistically continuing to look forward and understand that they can. So it's more about, it's not connecting this thing that they're doing or not doing to anything personal, but the personal part comes from what they are bringing to the table while they pursue this thing. So they're not connected to the success or failure at all. And why I say it comes back to the goal setting is, like you said, if my goal is $1 million, that's what I want to make. I want to make $1 million. Well, that's a thing, right? That's a thing that I can achieve or not. I can succeed or fail in this one objective thing. And when people talk about goal setting, they're a lot of times that's what they emphasize, is we need the specific measurable things. So this $1 million, I know when I hit it, when I don't. I would argue that if we're going to set goals, we would be much better off setting goals around how we want to be rather than what we want to do.
Mhm.
So if patience is important to me, then my goal needs to be, I'm going to recognize as fast as possible when my patience starts to disappear, and I'm going to grab control as quickly as I can in a way that brings me back down and reestablishes the patience that's so valuable to me and that I have decided is very important in my life. That's because it doesn't matter whether I'm at work or if I'm dealing with my family or if I'm at the grocery store. But that how I'm going to be
You're
goal
more holistic.
will be
Yeah.
helpful for me.
Yeah, it's your whole life. Because some people would just segment it, it's like, yeah, I want peak performance. So, yeah, if you got like a phased approach to doing performance, they might only focus on their physical performance, but not their mental or spiritual. And there's a lot of legs to a human being. A lot of, so if you the foundation is like, if you only work on one thing, foundational thing, but I had talked to this guy who was like a physical therapist, and he had a problem that he had to recognize that he had six pack abs. He looked great, but he didn't. When he looked in the mirror, looking glass, he didn't see that. He saw something else, and he had to work on getting his kind of self esteem up. And it didn't matter if his body was in perfect condition. His mental state wasn't.
Mhm. Well,
And
there's
if
no
you
way
don't
to
have that,
separate those things. I mean, in the
yeah,
work that I do, you mentioned a couple things that are really central to the work that I do with whomever, with athletes, with performers, with business people, with educators. It doesn't matter who, but the idea that that I lost where I was going. Say what you say your thing that you ended with again.
well, I think it was like this idea that like you can't have, like, there's pillars to your human
Oh, yeah,
being,
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
and then
because
you can't just work on one and
no,
think
you
that
can't.
that's going to solve it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who it is that I'm talking to. Those are the things: physical, mental, emotional, social. Physical, mental, emotional, social, and sometimes spiritual. And the way that I define spiritual is feeling like we're part of a larger something, that we're not just our own little bubble walking through life individually and separated, that we are actually connected to and a part of something larger than ourselves. That's the spiritual. But all of those areas, like you said, the human beings are complicated. We are complex things. And all of those different components, physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, all come together synergistically to make us who we are in any given moment. And the thing is, we can't if we're focused on one, that's fine. For example, I might, I might pick up some dumbbells and do some curls. I am clearly focusing on my physical in terms of my strength. But I can't do that and not also change my mental state. Because when I'm engaged in physical activity, for example, neurochemicals in the brain start getting secreted that don't when I'm just regular walking around life. And that affects the way that I think. It affects the way that I perceive the world. It affects the emotions that I experience. And all of that will impact the likelihood that I will go seek out somebody and talk to them. Or if it's not even about seeking out, if I just am talking to somebody, because that's what's happening, it will affect the way I interact with that person. And the way that I interact with that person is going to affect my emotional state, which is going to change my physiology. It's all connected, and we can't ignore that. That's a really important point that you made. And then second is you mentioned different phases of performance. And this is something that I train too. It's a program called Phase X that I do, but it's a 4-phased approach to performance, in that any performance, literally anything. And by the way, this is something I need to make clear. When I say performance, I don't just mean on a sports field or on a stage or anything like that. I mean anything that we're doing that we think is important. Anything that we choose to engage in that we want to do well, that's a performance. It might be disciplining a kid. It might be a challenging conversation with a spouse. It might be cooking a meal, preparing for a party, whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter. If it matters to you, if it's important to you, then that's a performance. And for any given performance, there's a before, a right before, a during, and an after. That's what there is. So and people have talked about before, during, and after with performance for a long time, but this was something that we came up with when I was working for the Army as a sport performance psychology consultant. This idea of the right before is one that I think gets lost. That's a place that people skip over, and it's important because the before, yeah, we want to prepare, we want to eat right, we want to sleep right, we want to make sure we have all our resources in place, that we've learned what we need to, that we've practiced, and then we go do it. But there's a middle ground. There's that right before. There's that transition from just my regular walking around regular life states to my performance states, my physical, mental, emotional, social states, that for whatever performance I'm talking about, I need to be in order to do my best. And that right before is where all of that happens. That's where I don't like talking about blocking out distractors.
Yeah.
I like to talk about focusing on task relevant things. So that's where the outside world disappears, except to the extent that whatever it is that I'm looking at and engaging with is relevant to the task at hand. That's when that shift happens. It's when my energy activation level changes, because we have a right amount of pumped upness for whatever we're doing. And we have to know what that is and then figure out how to get there. So all of that happens in that right before stage, so that when the performance kicks off, when we're actually engaged in what we're doing, we're ready. We're completely prepared and set, and we're ready to go. And then afterward is the recovery part. And this is another one that a lot of people blow off. We only have a finite amount of energy, and we have to recover it regularly. So after whatever we've done, we need to take time to rejuvenate, to recover. That's one part of phase 4. How do we do that? How do we do that efficiently and in a very short period of time, if that's what we have? Like, for example, in stunts, we have take 2. So I'll hit the ground, and then it's like, okay, we're doing it again, go back to 1. Okay, so I've got a little bit of time to recover, to reset, to get myself back into where I need to be. Or it might be a year. Maybe I gave a presentation at a conference, and I'm not going to give another presentation at a conference for another year or so. Whatever it is, we need to figure out how to recover that energy and learn how to learn from the experience, because that's the second part of that last
Mhm.
phase. Part one is recover your energy. Part two is how do I become better from having gone through what I just did, whether it went well, whether it didn't, whether I succeeded, whether I failed, whether I met my goals or I didn't. How do I get better? Because again, this goes back to that discussion of fear that we were having before. If I can look at a situation as one that is an opportunity where, regardless of the outcome, whether it's what I want or whether it's not what I want, I know that I'm going to come out better than I went in. If I know that, I mean, truly know it, truly believe it in my heart, that no matter the situation, I will come out of it better than I went in, regardless of how it all went. That it doesn't eliminate, but it certainly reduces the fear to a place where we can tackle it and engage in those activities. It won't be at a level that will prevent us from getting into what we're getting into.
So it makes it like permission structure to, make it possible. It seems like, because like if you've got that kind of pessimism that you can't do it, that you can't get it better, that you can't learn more, that you're locked in. Like if you have a permission structure where you're very expansive and you're willing to kind of push yourself outside of like the kind of norm zone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I always talk about like David Bowie had this comment said that as a musician, he'd like to kind of potentially tread water, not drown, but go into areas that he wasn't fully comfortable to kind of drive his curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So he would kind of, you see him shapeshift and changing styles, which typically isn't done. Usually you stay in the form that you're in. You're a blues guy, you stay as a blues guy. You're progressive, you stay in progressive. You can move all around. And that kind of pushing the envelope and giving yourself the permission structure. Yeah, I can fail. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm learning that
Yeah.
I'm going to learn from
Well,
it. Yeah, yeah,
and it comes down to how we even define success and failure. That's one of the first place that I start with my clients. I'm like, well, what is success? And if it's the getting the $1 million, I'm just going to use that example because you threw it out there. You can replace that with whatever. If that's success, well, there are so many variables that are going to determine whether you succeed or not. And some of those you have control over. Most of them you don't. So if you don't achieve that goal, it may be through absolutely no fault of your own. It's just that's how the world works. So defining success in terms of things that we can control, this is why I said shifting the goal setting from what we want to do to what we want to be. I can determine in any given moment what my level of energy is that I'm going to bring to the world and what my attitude is going to be as I interact with the world. I can choose these things. So those things are more in my control than other outcomes that are out there in the world. But again, it's really, it is, if I define success in terms of development, growth, improvement, and I know that no matter what happens in this situation, if I go into, I don't know if a lot of musicians listen to this podcast or not, but let's say that you've got a big show that's coming up and it's in front of an audience you've never played, it's at a venue you've never done, and it's a big thing. You're looking forward to it. But it's new and it's scary and it's, there could be a lot of things that go wrong. Well, this is where, and this kind of takes us into that pressure conversation. This is where, if I know that I come out of the other side okay, that no matter whether I get on stage and tank or I get on stage and I kill it, I'm going to be better. I will have grown and improved as a result. If that growth and improvement was my goal to begin with, well, then I didn't fail.
yeah.
I didn't fail. The
Small
outcome
win.
might not be what I wanted it to be,
Yeah,
but I didn't fail. I succeeded because I achieved growth.
I think a lot of people are measured by like data analytics, and maybe the data analytics doesn't show that like the fact that you did it, you learned a new tool set, you had a new experience. But if their tickets weren't good, the review wasn't good, the venue sound quality wasn't good. All these things like that you can measure, and people could come back and say, "Hey, it didn't work." But from a growth perspective, it happens a lot of times that artists will go and do something. They did something super popular, right? Then the next thing they did, the critics like it, but the fans don't like it. Now,
Mhm.
monetarily, that didn't work, but growth wise, as an artist, you got into something better, and it actually might be by the next thing you do, then the public gets that that was part of your growth of as an artist. You needed to go through that, and
Yeah.
now they get it. But
Yeah.
sometimes other people don't get it, but it was for you,
Yeah. Well, I
right?
mean, just because we speak English, we have these terms, success, failure. We need to we need to hold this paradox in our minds. We can succeed and fail simultaneously. And what I mean by that is that I can set multiple goals. So I can if I'm a musician and I'm going to play in this venue, I want to sell X number of tickets, bring in X amount of revenue. That's a goal, sure. And I want to grow. I want to get better. I want to know that I've improved in this situation. Well, if you go perform and you didn't sell as many tickets, that's a failure. If you came out and grew as a result, if you got better from that experience, then you succeeded. And we can succeed and fail simultaneously. They're not
Yeah,
mutually exclusive. So it really comes down to prioritizing which of those goals and objectives is the more, well, in this case there were only two, so the more important, but sometimes we can have more than that. That's
yeah.
that's up to us to determine.
You can go back and reframe it because I know we're at the end, but the idea is like you could have recorded that, right? And in that moment, right, that venue, people didn't like it. But then later, people thought it was amazing. An example of that is Bob Dylan when he went electric. Bob Dylan went electric in front of this folk crowd. Now the audio tapes of that are just like reviewed at like a high level by critics saying this is amazing. At the time he did it, point in time, people didn't like it, but he grew as an artist. And later, people looked at it and said, "Well, that was amazing." So there can be a reassessment. It's always like sequential. It
Yeah.
can in the future, people could reassess it and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
that was good."
Well, honestly, sometimes we relabel unexpected as bad. We're humans. We like predictability. As much as somebody might say, "No, I'm spontaneous. I love spontaneity," and you might, and that's all fine. But you're still human, and so I like to know that when I go to the wall to flip a switch, that the light's going to turn on.
Come
I
on,
like
yeah.
knowing that when I go to the water, I flip, the water comes out. There's a certain amount of predictability that we need in order to even work through life. If I had to question every single time whether my car is going to start, or whether when I walk out the door at 9 a.m. if the sun's going to be out, there's a certain amount of predictability that we need. And when we don't encounter that predictability, when something comes at us that we didn't expect, often we will label that thing as bad. It's because it's not what we know. It's not what we're familiar with. And that's the label that it gets is bad. Whereas if we can, again, just look at some of those things with more of a attitude than a what attitude, then it can be a lot better.
Yeah, I know you're pressed for time, and we were have a really good flow here, but I know you have to go this morning. So, but I think it's been a great conversation. We do have your website, brianhiteglobal.com, and maybe you can mention briefly before you go what people find there.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, just if you struggle with pressure, with stress, with just feeling overwhelmed in performance situations, and you don't have somebody to work with you on that and just kind of hold your hand through the process, I encourage you, please go to the website, take a look at some of the programs that I have, reach out to me via email, brian@brianhiteglobal.com, or just schedule a discovery call. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Just schedule one of those and let's have a conversation, because I'll tell you, I've struggled with motivation. I've struggled with stress and pressure from a lot of different contexts and a lot of different ways. And I mean, entrepreneurially, as a performer, as a stuntman, just as a person, as a dad, I've experienced these things. It's not a comfortable place to be. So I strongly encourage you, just reach out to me. Let's have the conversation about that. Because these are things that we don't have to be weighed down by. We don't have to go into performance situations feeling a lot of pressure or under a lot of stress. or anytime we're presented with opportunities, we don't have to feel overwhelmed. And anytime that we're struggling with motivation, it doesn't have to stay that way. There are systematic ways that we can target certain things to help create conditions for our motivation to be where we want it to be. So these aren't things that are unchangeable, and they aren't things that you necessarily might just come across through discovery learning. It helps to have help. So please reach out.
Yeah, I want to let people know that's fully clickable. We were just live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and you'll be able to click on that in the podcast description. But I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. Thank you. And this will be out in the world as soon as we're done. It's out on those channels. It'll be on all the other channels you can listen to or watch a podcast by later today. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.